Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products brought you the greenest home products for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now let's get to the show. Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome back to another broadcast of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and with me now, world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony, and welcome, everybody. As you know, we've always had a fascination with Egypt here at Truth Be Told and its history. Our returning guest, however, Stephen Mehler, eats, lives, breathes, and even dreams all things Egypt.
His fascination with ancient Egypt began at the age of 8 and led him to dedicating his life to learn the truth about Egypt, and he even became a student, disciple, and a close friend of Egypt-born Egyptologist known as Akim.
Stephen's books include The Land of Osiris, as well as From the Light into Darkness, The Evolution of Religion in Ancient Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put your hands together because we want to know what Stephen's been up to since he visited us exactly 1 year ago this month. Please welcome to Truth Be Told, Stephen Mehler.
Stephen is back, my fellow Sagittarian.
That's correct. And I have something real interesting to tell you, Tony, right off the front.
Uh-oh.
What would be the odds of my being interviewed twice in a row by someone who has the same birthday that I do?
It's true. Who else?
Well, Jonathan Goldman, and I'm going to talk a lot about him tonight, is someone you actually should interview. Jonathan Goldman
Write his name
is an
down.
internationally known musician and sound healer.
Wow.
After knowing him for many years, he lives near me in Boulder, Colorado. We've had many great conversations over the years. He recently interviewed me on his show. So he's also born December 7th.
That is crazy.
Older than you, younger than me.
Oh. We're only like 3 or 4 years apart, so. Well, I turned 46 and you turned 52, right?
Yeah, 70.
70.
Whoa.
Wow. Well, you look
I've
amazing.
been doing this work for over 50 years.
Wow. That's amazing.
And you're doing it from your heart,
and
you
we're
can tell.
and we're so happy that you do this because we learn every time you're here. We learn so much from you. We just had Brian Forster on, and
I was fortunate enough to listen to the hour, so we're going to continue a lot
Yes.
especially a lot of the things that Eddie was talking about. We're going to continue with Egypt because I'm going to start actually where you guys left off, and to tell people,
do it.
Brian Foster is far and away the best person to go to Peru with.
Wow.
There's no one that I've come across in my lifetime who has done more accurate research on the ancient South American cultures as he has. And we were great fortune, my group, the Kemet School, went on tour with Brian in September of 2014. And I experienced Cusco, same feelings that Eddie had. I love Cusco and the Sacred Valley, as Brian talked about. So we can talk about that too. But we are returning, as he said, in July 2016, from July 6th through 20th, the Kemet School, which is myself, Yusuf and Patricia Awayan, are returning to Peru with Brian. And that tour only has a few people left. So we wanted people to come on in. He's going to close it off at a certain number, and it's getting full. And we also have our April tour, as we talked about. And this is the theme we're going to talk about tonight, as you both mentioned. We call our tours to Egypt techno-spiritual tours. Because in the vein of my great master, Abdel Hakim Awayan, who was known as Hakim, as he taught, was the greatest teacher from teaching from both sides of the brain, giving you that right brain physical experience. We'll tell you what the stone was that was used. We'll tell you what the temples were for. We'll tell you what pyramids were actually for, when we think they were built, how they were built. All the physical evidence, and we use strong evidence of the sciences. Archaeology, which is my field, geology, engineering, physics, chemistry, all are members of our school. But we also feature, which Hakim always gave to everyone who went on tour with him, and he was an active tour guide for 56 years. that spiritual experience. Because as you guys were talking about last hour, and we hope the people that were listening last hour, listening this hour, or the new people, that these sites, what we call vortexes, what we call power places, what we call energy spots, they feature three things throughout the world: underground source of running water, a natural source of crystal, and what we call igneous rock, volcanic stone, which is high in crystalline content. It is the crystal content of the stone that makes its importance. So these three things in combination, the water working with the crystal, creates the energy fields, which are at these sites around the world. And you don't have to be, as we say, psychic. When I worked, as we have talked before, when I worked for the Rosicrucian Order, we never used that word. We hated the word psychic, because it's saying that somebody's psychic, somebody else isn't. We use the word sensitive, because we all are to different degrees. Folks like Eddie, folks like who go on the path at a young age, allow these abilities not to be stifled by parents, by religion, by education. They become the so-called professionals in the field. But we're all sensitive to every degree, and that's what, when I worked professionally for the Rosicrucian Order, we did that with everybody off the street. And I tell people, everybody that comes with me to Egypt on tour has an experience. As I recently told people in lecture, I've had many men who've been dragged to Egypt on tour by their wives, that they weren't into anything metaphysical, nothing Egyptian, no archaeology. They're just along for the ride. So they would come and talk to me on the side. I don't get these things you guys are talking about, but the wife is having a good time. And I would always say, just go along with it, just experience it. And when we get to the Great Pyramid, just allow yourself to be open. We're going to do things in there, just allow. And every one of them told me after it's over, I felt something, I experienced something. I'm not the same person. And that's the truth. Everybody that will come on tour with Brian Foster to Peru, Bolivia, anybody that comes on tour with us to Egypt is not the same person when they come home.
Well, like I said, one day.
Yeah,
You're gonna
We
put
got
have to
space
put up
open
with,
in April, but if it's not this year, we're trying to do it every year that we can.
Well, like I said, you're gonna have to put up with Eddie and I one of these days.
Yeah.
They'll be like,
Definitely.
why did we
We'll
allow them
put
to
up,
go
it'll
with
be an
this?
absolute joy.
Yeah, we'll sit on a jumper seat in the back of the plane. We'll hand out peanuts. We'll do whatever you need.
Absolutely.
All right, so it's been a year. I can't
Yes.
believe it's been a year, and in those years you've had a tour, but I'm sure, knowing you, that you've traveled and done research, and I want to know what you've done in that year and what any new discoveries that you could share with us.
Absolutely. Well, let me tell you what the Kemet School has been up to, because that
Please
is what
do.
I am. Just recently, a miracle, the Egyptian government allowed access in the Cairo Museum for photographs and video. They have not done that since the late 90s.
Wow. Why is that?
Oh, because they want to sell the books.
Oh, okay.
They don't want you to like we do, make all these books out of photographs and
Right.
use it for the evidence. But they've had for many years a big volume that they sell in a museum store for $75 American. Probably is $125 American now, because I haven't seen it in many years. And that's why they forbade flash. And so my teacher Hakeem would teach me this little trick, which I'd love to share, which we did. Why I have photographs in my book, The Land of Osiris, from inside the museum. It was this little trick Hakeem would teach me. He would call it the oops.
The oops.
So they started, for first, up until the early 90s, you were allowed to take photographs inside the museum. When Zahi Hawass became in control in the 80s and 90s, he began to restrict these things, less and less photographs. So then in the 90s, when I first came, 1992, I will be going back to Egypt in 3 weeks to do a private tour with another person you should interview, a man named Satyen Raja, who's a great teacher from Canada. He leads a group called Warrior Sage. He came with me 8 years ago and was the last group I brought to see my teacher, because he passed in 2008. And so they're coming back, and he's got a great group of people, and I'm gonna be there in 3 weeks. That's a private group. Then in April, I'll be back with Brian. And so what has happened is, from the early 90s, Zahi Hawass then put out a dictate: you couldn't take flash in the museum because the flash would disturb the artifacts. Of course, there's no scientific evidence of this whatsoever, but that was his dictate. So we used to do this thing called oops. What they do is every room in the Cairo Museum usually has a security guard, antiquities police in that room, just in that particular room. So you go in there, which I did in 1992 and in 1997, where I took photographs which were in my book Land of Osiris and From Light into Darkness. And after that, you could not take any photographs in the museum starting in 2000. So I would shoot a flash, and the guards would jump up and say, "Oh, no, 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 you're not allowed to take a flash." And I would say, "Oh, sorry, oops." I made a mistake. I turn it off. And then we'd go into the next room, which is another guard, and do exactly the same thing.
Oh, okay.
But then they stopped. Now, for many, many years, up until December 2015, they would confiscate all cameras, all video equipment. You go through. It is such a security thing now. It used to be when 1992 I came to Egypt. You went right in the museum. Now you go through 5 different metal detectors, 5 different security stops to go in the Cairo Museum because there have been incidents, and so you can't get anything metallic in. But Brian Foster is a genius at bringing little tools to Egypt every year, whether it's glasses that are a camera, whether it's a watch that it's a camera, and we have done videos. People go to Brian Foster's website, hiddenincavideos.com, part of his Hidden Inca Tours website, and you go to his videos. He has taken many videos in Egypt in the last 3 years. We've done 3 tours together now. This one will be our 4th. And we have video taken inside the museum, which is technically illegal. But they now allowed, so now it's over. In December, our people went in and took thousands of photographs and hours of video footage that's going to be released. We'll have Yusuf Aliyan and Mohammed Ibrahim, who's our Egyptologist and part of our tour group. They will be producing videos. It's all been on Facebook. A lot of it's coming out already. And photographs, which are priceless. Now, this is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
We have been up until this point been concentrating on the fact that the ancient technology, what we call the ancient megalithic, unknown, lost supposedly ancient technology, which we see due to the work of engineers like Chris Dunn and others. In granite, we used granite as our standard because we see so much work in granite in Egypt and in a lot of the ancient sites, in Lebanon too. And granite is 7 on the scale, MOHS, called the Mohs scale, which geology and mineralogy use to rate the hardness of stone. Granite is 7, diamond, of course, being 10, the hardest. So 7. And it's because of the quartz content and how, I could go into detail here, which we do on tour, because we now have a resident geologist with us in our group named Susan Moore. She's now part of our tour. She's taught us so much about stone. There's a piece of granite up right now. What people can look at, the black and what looks like the pink in it, is what's known as the substrate, feldspar. That's that's only 6.5 on the scale. But what you can't see in there, which would be transparent, is the quartz content.
Yeah.
And in particular, the quartz that we use, what we call cyanite rose quartz, which comes from Aswan, which has this beautiful pinkish color. And you can actually see some of the pink rose quartz in the crystal, in the stone sometimes. So it's the crystal that makes it at 7. Because quartz is a 7. It has to be something as hard or harder to cut it. So this is why Chris Dunn, all the engineers we've brought said they must have had diamond tools or something on that effect to cut in. Well, now, because we have seen these bowls in the museum for years, but never could take photographs, never were able to study and sit, we now see that there are bowls in the Cairo Museum that contain corundum. Corundum is ruby, sapphire, 9 on the Mohs scale. Now, corundum forms in deposits of granite. So what we see is a bowl that's a granitic bowl that has corundum in it. So it wouldn't be exactly 9, but we're looking at 8.5 on the Mohs scale. Something never seen before, never realized before. No archaeologist, no Egyptologist has mentioned that there are these bowls in the Cairo Museum, harder than granite, perfectly machined, perfectly tooled. And even the stonemasons we have brought to look at this said, even with diamond tools, we don't know how they did it. Well, we can give you a theory on how we think they did it.
Well,
Let's do it.
I was going to say,
Okay.
well, what's the theory?
I know, we're excited.
Don't just tease.
Impact ultrasonic machining.
Wow.
One of the reason why I was just interviewed by Jonathan Goldman and why he's such a great person to interview, because again, he's been a musician all his life and born December 7th, but he's also internationally known sound healer, has done a lot of research over the years on how sound is used for healing. Well, as I've mentioned to you guys before, and I'll continue to mention as long as I talk about it, when I first came to Egypt in 1992, and as I say, my next journey will be my 19th journey in 23 years, I met with Hakim, and he immediately took me on. He saw that I was one, you could say, the disciple or the son that he always wanted. He had 8 sons, 11 children, but none of his 8 sons, except his second youngest, Yusuf, who we work with, who was the co-director of the Kemet School, really followed in his footsteps. And not even Yusuf did academically. What set Hakim apart from any other teacher I've come across in my lifetime is that he was academically trained. Is that he went and got dual degrees in Egyptology and archaeology for what was then called Fuad University in 1952. Today is Cairo University. But at a young age, at the age of 6, he was sent to study with a Sufi master. And that Sufi master made him memorize Quran, which was not that unusual. Many of the boys in the village of his day were supposed to memorize Quran, not just learn it, but very few did. He did. Many times on occasion, I would see arguments in the house with he and his wonderful childhood friend, and they would argue about a passage in Quran. And Hakim would say it's za, 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 za. And they would say, no, 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 it's something, something. And he would yell out for his daughter, Mariam. And she'd come and bring in the Quran. He'd open to that page, to that chapter. He would have it verse, punctuation, letter, perfect every time. So he memorized Quran at the age of 6. But the greatest gift his master teacher gave her, and his name was Ismail, but he was given a title in Arabic, Zen Nar. Nar is fire, the fire of Zen. And Zen is a Sanskrit word. What is it supposedly doing in Arabic? It means consciousness. It means, people use it as Zen yoga. Yoga union for consciousness. So actually, he taught me, comes from a very ancient Cometian word, zim, which meant consciousness. Wow. So here the master is called the fire of consciousness. And what does he teach him? The greatest gift he gives him is to teach him to meditate at the age of 6.
Wow.
And that was the power of his life.
6.
Because then he went out. He had an uncle who was an antiquities merchant, was officially licensed to sell antiquities, who got him a job at the age of 8 to work with American Egyptologist George Reisner, who was working from Harvard University in the 30s and had the stipend, the firman, they called it in those days, to excavate on the Giza Plateau. So Hakim started his career first learning to meditate at 6, to memorize Quran, to learn Sufi wisdom, and then at 8 years old, he becomes an archaeologist. He goes to work for George Reisner, just as one of the boys in the village, clearing rubble away from the sites. But what does he do? At the age of 8, he wanders into a tunnel, he comes into a tomb, he looks up at the walls, and he says to himself and to God, at the age of 8, I want to know what's written on those walls.
Wow.
And he was one of the few people in the world who did.
Wow.
That was his life's journey.
You're such
He went on a life's journey, going to every site, meeting with the indigenous wisdom keepers, the masters at every site, learning the secrets of every site. They taught him. He became what was known as the keeper of the keys, and that he knew what we call the Holy of Holies. Again, at every site in Egypt, every temple, every pyramid, again, there's always underground running water and this igneous rock, this volcanic stone. So there is always a center point at every site, which later became known as the Holy of the Holies, which is where you would have your shrine. You'd have your image of the god later when religion comes in. But this is where the energy of the site is focused, where you can actually hear the water running underneath. He was shown that at every site. He was taught how to turn the key, to turn the energy on at every site. And he taught that to me, he taught that to his son, and that's what we do to everyone. It's because, again, we say, he looked at me when he first met me in 92 and invited me to come back. It wasn't until 5 years later, in 1997, where I came back and did 3 weeks of field work with him, which became my first book, The Land of Osiris. He would teach, he looked at me, understood that I already was an archaeologist. I already had the academic background that he wished he had a son that would follow. He chose me not only to be his disciple, but to be his eldest son. And so I became a member of his family. And then he looked at me and he said, for me, as he was a true master, he could look through anybody and know exactly where they were. He would answer every question that was given to him based on the position of the questioner. Wow. Somebody would ask him something, he'd answer it one way. Another person would ask him the same question, he'd answer it another way. So he looked at me and he said, for me, my work was to concentrate on sound and water. The knowledge that the ancients had and the interplay of both. And as I said in just in an interview with Jonathan Goldman, we know that sound travels through water
Right.
hundreds of times faster than it does through air. And this is why we know that blue whales, in particular, can communicate with each other 1,000 miles underwater. And they do it with ultrasound. So, what we know of this ancient Egyptian civilization, as then now we can bring in with Brian, with Peru, with all things, we think this was a worldwide grid, as he mentioned, a worldwide ancient pre-cataclysmic megalithic civilization. They all knew this, and they all utilized sound and water. And sound was everything. Again, I say to you both, as I just said to Jonathan, I just heard some tapes of raw footage of Hakim that were used in the Pyramid Code. It's the last interviews he did in late 2007, early 2008. And he's talking about sound. And he says sound is everything. But he says this. Think about this in just the English language, our language. Think about how many words you could list that deal with or describe sound. And he just started with easy ones. Noisy, loud. Think about it. From the positive to the negative. Harmonious, sweet, loving, healing. Almost every English word can be utilized with sound. Then you have the scientific terms. Acoustics, harmonics, resonance. It's on and on and on. And then he said, because he was, among so many other things, a master linguist, philologist, he said, not just in English. Think about it in their ancient languages, like Sanskrit, Aramaic, Urdu, the languages that became the languages today, maybe even Anglo-Saxon. But think about it. How many words describe or deal with sound? And it shows you how ancient the knowing was.
Wow. I
So
love talking to you.
I know,
I
because-
learned so much. I feel like a D student right now just because.
guys are great because you ask great questions. I mean,
thank
that was
you.
the same last hour. And that's what makes the interviews get so,
Oh.
better. The quality of the questions, the quality of what comes out. And that was the way he was. And that's what he taught me. So what we do, again, you want to know what's new. What's new is
Yeah.
just in the last couple of years, because of his son, Yusuf Awiyan, who's now walks in his father's footsteps, never having gone to school, never done this academically, but he started out as a musician. So as a musician, sound was his life. And as I said to Jonathan Goldman, the people who come to Egypt with me, who get it the most, the quickest, the fastest, the deepest, are musicians, because their life is sound. Then are the engineers, the scientists, the geologists, they get it right away. But musicians always, because everything was sound. We're talking about ancient civilizations that were bathed in infrasound, meaning not audible, but constantly working on you. So we have understanding that sound was used to heal, to keep our immune systems at the highest level of operation, meaning no bacteria, no virus should bother us. So what do we say? We say the ancient Kemetians, who we call these people, Kemetians, not Egyptians. Kemet was the name of the civilization, meant the black land. They could live hundreds of years. They are the source of the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Because as I say, and as I've taught, again, being a student of Joseph Campbell and many others studying mythology for 50 years or more, every myth has a truth in time and space somewhere, but sometimes gets so distorted in the telling that you really have to dig to get at that kernel of truth. But there is. The idea that human beings once lived maybe 900 years like Methuselah is quite possible, because sound was always there. Pyramids were producing sound. Temples were producing sound. One of the latest things, as I said, we've discovered, we thought for many years that the dynastic people came along, drilled these tunnels, and made them into tombs where we buried the so-called kings, like the Valley of the Kings. We all go. That's the most visited site in Egypt. Every tour group goes to it's one of my least favorite places, but it is the place that at one time, to show you how things have changed in Egypt, at one time, at peak, maybe mid-90s, before 2001, there'd be 20,000 people a day would go to the Valley.
Wow. Just at the Valley of the Kings.
Just to do it, 20,000 people a day on the Giza Plateau.
Oh, man.
Now you're lucky if you see 100 people a day. At peak time, tourism in Egypt in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were 440 boats running the Nile as tourist boats. My friend Patricia Aouyan told me last summer there were 6.
That's unreal.
What?
That's how tourism has died in Egypt.
But why do you think? Is it because of the terrorism?
Of course.
Is
Is
that's
it because of the actual
course,
terrorism?
European. Are you kidding? I used to, when I went in the 90s, I'd see thousands of Germans, thousands of Italians, Spanish, Russians. I mean, now you mainly see Chinese, Indians. You don't see Americans like us, like we used to.
Right.
There used to be tour groups. Hakeem once did a tour group with Barbara Hand Clow that had 250 people.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
Now we fight to get 25, 30.
that? So how?
Yes, people are afraid. And that's one of the reasons we do these interviews. Brian, maybe a little absent-mindedly, was supposed to mention it last hour too. Egypt is safe. That's
I
the
was gonna
point of
ask you.
saying Egypt is safe. As I just recently had a study group here in Lafayette, Colorado. I did some lectures this summer. And I was a woman there, and people would go around the room, introduce themselves. And a lot of people had been to Egypt. So there was an elderly woman there. Elderly, I'm elderly now. And she said, "Oh, I've been to Egypt twice, but I would be hesitant to go back now." And I said, "Why?" "Oh, because it's dangerous." I said, "Dangerous." And here I am, I'm talking to you from Colorado. I said to her, "Do you know it's safer anywhere in Egypt than it is to walk into a Planned Parenthood in Colorado?"
Wow.
Or a movie theater.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Right.
Yeah, it's like-
Egyptians don't own guns. Guns are illegal in Egypt. The
Wow.
only people that have guns in Egypt are the police, the military, and criminals.
Right.
Wow.
But common people don't have a Second Amendment where everybody's got a peace and they get into an argument, they're going to shoot each other, which they do in this country. You know, recently, now they're starting to look at the open carry laws in Texas. How about that? Because 2 people just shot each other over a cup of coffee in a Starbucks in Texas.
Well,
over a cup of coffee.
Well, I heard that yesterday. Was it yesterday? This guy who had been drinking, he had a gun in a movie theater. He dropped his gun or something like that. He was fumbling with it and shot the woman in front of him.
Yes.
Just because.
And the fact is that 40 people have been killed by terrorists in America in the last, after 9/11. Okay? 40 people. 52 people are killed per year by toddlers.
By toddlers.
Finding a gun and shooting their sibling or their
Right.
parents.
Yeah. That
52 per year in this country.
Yeah, we were 1 second from that happening one Christmas at my mom's house.
Wow.
Yeah, just a breath away. And after that, Mom got rid of her 38 caliber pistol. Yeah.
God bless her.
I want to bring something up because we spoke about terrorism, and right now in Syria, you know, it's ISIS and everything going on. It made me sick when I watched the video, and it could be true, could be not. ISIS was supposedly destroying many ancient sites. Supposedly, and when I saw that, I was like, if that's true, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Because,
well, it is a fact that radical Islam does not see any value in these things at all. The majority of Muslims, like in Egypt, 99.99999% love the culture of their country and value
Right.
the antiquities. It's the extreme radical element that think like radical extreme Christians in this country.
right, true.
That the earth is only 6,000 years old, so anything can't possibly be older than that. So, and to understand that, because I want to dispel a myth. It has always been taught when people come to Egypt that they say that Sphinx's nose has been shot off, and it was shot off by Napoleon's army, which is an absolute lie. And it is, I'll say it carefully, a Muslim lie. Because the fact of the matter is that the Sphinx's nose was shot off in the 13th century by people who are known as the Mamelukes, who are followers of the great Muslim sheikh Salah ad-Din. And it was his cannon men who shot off the nose of the Sphinx because it happens to be a part of Sharia law that if you tell a lie, your tongue is cut out, and if you steal, your hands are cut off, and they will cut off your nose to take away your power.
Oh, wow.
So it was Muslims who cut off the nose of the Sphinx.
That is crazy.
And Muslims who partially burned the Library of Alexandria. Christians first, but Muslims second, who burned the texts at the Library of Alexandria. So it's just ignorance. It's just ignorance. But believe me when I say to people that overwhelming majority of Egyptians do not think this way. They love being the fact that even though they may not be related, actually genetically DNA from the ancient people, we all are because we're scattered around the world. And this is part of what Hakeem taught, that it was originally 42 tribes, and those 42 tribes have been scattered all over the planet. Why so many people have a connection to ancient Egypt who are not Arabic or are not from that area? Because the ancient Egyptians were all races of people. We talk about
Right.
42 tribes.
42
that were all
tribes.
races of people. So people feel that. So yeah, I mean, the Egyptians value their monument. This is why I know that, and I don't really want to get into too much politics, but ISIS is never going to, as they promised, invade the Giza Plateau and blow up the Sphinx. And it was the Muslim Brotherhood even said when they took over Egypt, even when they elected their Morsi, their puppet, that they thought they should blow up the Sphinx and the monument and the pyramids because they're kafir, which is taboo. And but it's never going to happen. Never going to
I
happen.
hope not, because I
Again,
haven't been
we
there
talked
yet.
before, you talked about with Brian, will the Nazca lines be wiped out? Well, again, you're looking at the Sphinx and the pyramids who have withstood a major cataclysm worldwide on this planet and earthquakes galore. One of the functions of the Great Pyramid was to alleviate seismic stress so that that area of the world has not had the major, because the greatest fault line in the world is East Africa, not the Andreas Fault in California, where you guys sit.
I know. Thanks for reminding me.
No, it's the fault. It's the East African fault. Is the most active fault line in the world. But the Great Pyramid is right on it. And when it was built, it relieved seismic stress. So for thousands and thousands of years of this civilization, there was not a major earthquake.
You should write a book just on facts like that nobody knows, because we're most people buy into mainstream media. Most people are watching, I don't want to say Fox News, but you know what I mean.
Right.
And they believe what they are told. Just believe it. And what you always bring to the table is a deeper wisdom, but you bring your scientific proof to it with a metaphysical spin on it, and then you go in like your friend with the right brain and the left brain, and then with your heart and with your solar plexus. And I loved when you were speaking about him, and when certain people would ask him, even if 100 people asked your friend the same question, he answered it based on their vibration, not on what he read or learned, but based on their frequency.
Right.
Exactly. Do you believe that we were frequency, invisible, non-physical frequencies, sound frequencies before we were ever incarnate into physical form?
Well, yes. And if you know the work of Drunvalo Melchizedek, who's someone that I followed very much, he would talk about the overwhelming majority. He talked about just consciousness, what is existence. The overwhelming majority of consciousness that exists is non-corporal, non-physical.
Yeah.
And they are watching the rest, always watching us. That's why people talk about the watchers. And what I found in this field, and I'm glad you bring up this field because I know you guys have dealt in this field.
Yeah.
And why, you mentioned before, Brian has been great. He's been on Ancient Aliens. I would just disagree with one thing Brian said earlier when he talked about science stopping this. No, it's not science. Science has no value, good or bad. Science is. It's only the administrators. What he's talking about is academia. And this is why I'm academically trained. I have 3 degrees in the sciences. But to realize for me to get to where I needed to be, I had to not be in academia. I had to be outside academia. And this is discussed in my first book, what you call paradigm shift. The term was invented by a man in the 50s. And he actually said most of the discoveries in science come from outside academia, which is true. And so that's what we're doing now. And so the whole idea of experiencing both sides of the brain is the only way. And this is why I went on the metaphysical path in the 60s. It's when I left the academic field in the 70s. I combined both. And so it's always been both for me. It can't be one or the other. You can't have the material without the physical. And Hakim saw that in me, and he saw that in people. And let me tell you how he teaches this. So I want you folks, everybody to hear this. Because again, this comes out of these latest tapes we're hearing. People talk about what he called the indigenous tradition, the oral tradition. And I even had it wrong myself. Many people think, and they actually ask him this question in this interview, is it when, in the ancient times when people would sit around the campfires and the children would be there and the elders would be around the campfire and it would tell them the stories, the creation myths, how it all came to be. And Hakim would say, no, that is patriarchy. What he would say is what he labeled the indigenous tradition, the oral tradition, was the matriarchal way. And then he would tell it using the example of his own life. And this fits very much into the Rosicrucians' teachings that I came up with, because the Rosicrucians teach about 7-year cycles. That we have 7-year cycles, 1 to 7, 7 to 14, 21, 28, 35. Something specific happens at each 7-year cycle point in our lives. It's a key turning. So they would divide a person's lifetime into 7-year cycles. And so he would say the first 7 years in ancient Kemet now, we're going back way over 10,000 years ago. There's no writing, there's no religion, there's no kings, there's no priests. But the civilization is matriarchal. Descent goes from mother to daughter. A person is always in his mother's house. A man is not considered important. You didn't even know who your father was. Woman chose. She chose that man. She chose that man because of that quality she wanted in him to produce an heir. There was no heterosexuality. There was no homosexuality. Anybody was sexual whoever they wanted to be. It was just to procreate, we would say heterosexual. But only she would choose the man for the qualities she wanted in her children. He was no longer important. He no longer was even influenced on the children. It was the mother's brothers, who we called the matriarchal uncle, who were the male symbols. So he would say a child is raised in his mother's house. And he would say, for the first 7 years, you are dictated by your mama. She gives you the rules. Wow. She tells you what to be. And this is true. We talk about this when we talk about these things. The natural order of things. Who teaches a cat to be a cat? Who teaches a dog to be a dog? Who teaches a human to be a human? Mama. Always right. Mama. Who teaches us where to shit, where not to shit, what to eat, what not to eat? It's always mama. So for the first 7 years of our life, we are subject to the law of mama. It is her house, her rules. But at the age of 8, the child, male or female, doesn't make a difference. And I can even talk about this for our sexuality. We'll talk about that because there's no sexuality and you can see this in the images of dynastic Egypt. Yep. All the children always shown naked, male and female, no difference, with a side lock, with the hair coming off to the side. For the first 7 years of their life, male and female are the same. There's no sexual identity. They choose at the age of 8 what path they want to follow. Doesn't matter what their biological equipment is. You don't need to be Bruce to become Caitlin. You are what you are. If you decide to be this, have just sex with men, that is your choice. Just sex with females, just choice. If you sex with animals, that's your choice. There's no taboos, no rules. But at the age of 8, the child says to mama, I'm not going to follow your rules anymore. I'm going to go out in the world and find it for myself.
Wow. And
Hakim would then demonstrate and show, mama goes like this.
Oh.
Our work is done. Go in peace.
Wow.
And that's what the life was. So there was no religion. There was no Bible telling you what God was, how creation came to be. You went out and you found it from yourself, and you're taught that you're born innately with 360 senses, not just 5. Your objective then is to open your senses and to know, not to think, not to believe, to know. So then I tell this little story to our tour group, and I want to tell it to you guys too. And he's always embarrassed when I tell it. But this is the second son, Yusuf Awiyan. Why he is the one chosen. Hakim would say, every time his wife would come to him and tell him she was with child, and that was many times. He had 11 children, and there were many others that didn't come in, so it was more than 11. He would go into meditation. He'd go by the Sphinx at dawn, and he'd sit and meditate, and he'd see the image of this child that's to be, and perhaps what their path could be, not what it would be. He left that choice to the person, but what it could be. And so then he would see a name. And that name would be what he would give the child. And he used biblical names. He named the son Moses. He named the son Aaron. He named the son Joseph. He named the son Jacob, etc. So when it came time for this last son, this was his 10th son, he saw the story of the Bible, the story of the biblical Joseph, how he saves his family. And he becomes the vizier of Egypt, etc., and all of that. And so he gave this boy the name Joseph. Thought he had a great destiny. So this is the story I tell about him. He didn't go to school. None of the boys went to school. They learned to read and write Arabic. They speak proficient English because Hakim's house was an international hostel. Hakim himself was proficient in at least 7 languages. I saw him be able to fake it in Japanese. Oh. Fake it means just say, like I can fake it in Arabic. I'm not fluent, but I can say enough where they respect. They know I know the language. But he was fluent in 7 languages, at least. And the ancient Comitian language, which very few people are. So he would say that to Yusuf, he would say to Yusuf when he was a small boy, he chose him. Yusuf would come as a teenager, and he would go out on the Giza Plateau, and he would find the tour groups, and he would listen to what the guides say, and he'd hang around with the tour groups. He'd come home. Hakim would say, "What'd you do today, Yusuf?" I went out on the plateau and I listened to the tour guide. Okay, nothing else. He did that for a few times. Being the boy that Yusuf is, finally he went out there, being a Sagittarius, which he is, Tony, out there on the Giza Plateau, and he listened. He said, "These guys are saying the same old shit every day. This is
Right.
crap." And he went out and he looked for himself, and he found, and he discovered, and he saw stone, and he'd become a stonemason then. As a teenager, he's carving in stone, and he became interested in stone. Came home. Hakim said to him, "What'd you do today, Yusuf?" "I went out on the plateau, but I didn't listen to them. I went out by myself and I looked." He said, "Sit down. Now let's talk."
Wow.
He was the only one of his family.
That is amazing.
Wow.
Why you're
Find it for yourself.
Yes.
yeah.
And this is why we call what we call the Kemet School. Yusuf has patented this phrase, and I love it. And this is why we're not writing a book. We call it a living book. Yes, I have written 2 books on the subject, but what a book is a snapshot in time. It was only what it was at that moment it was written. Things change every day, add,
Right.
grow, expand, and we've expanded everything. It's still use it as the core. Yes, it's the core of what we teach, but we're learning every day, so that's why we call it a living book.
Yeah.
So yes, what we have found out now is the dynastic people did not cut these tombs for kings. These were already existing ancient water tunnels that were modified into tombs. All under the Giza Plateau, we can show you this, the Valley of the Kings, everywhere we go, when we go into the tunnels, what do? We tone. And what do we hear? Harmonic, acoustic, harmonic resonance. Bodies of dead kings do not need to be in an acoustical environment. This is for the living. This was only done for the living, not for the dead. So what we know now, and the proof of it was the last tunnel that was found in the Valley of the Kings by Zahi Hawass, where they were looking for another Ramses, went on for 2.5 miles. Whoa. There was a stone box in them. We don't call them sarcophagus. They are resonant boxes of granite, rose granite, no inscriptions on it whatsoever, no inscriptions on the walls, no glyphs, not anything. If that was to be a tomb, it would have been completed. It never was a tomb. They were originally tunnels for water. So this is the secret. They did their work underground before they did it above ground.
I want to ask you, because it just popped in my head as you're talking, that like you said, Eddie, that what we quote psychic, but all of us has the sensitivity of a psychic. But have you ever thought or felt that you were of ancient times in a past life?
This is a subject we could get into for many, many sessions. The whole idea of reincarnation, and past lives. As I went on the spiritual path in the 60s, I got involved with the Rosicrucians in the 70s. Obviously, I started to believe in past lives. I went to Egypt, certainly felt deja vu. I've been here before, like I have felt in certain places in the world, like Prague in the Czech Republic, like Paris, that when I went to these places, I know I've walked these streets before. But Hakim had a very different explanation of reincarnation than is accepted in so-called New Age today, more in the line of the Buddha. The Buddha said, well, there's no such thing as the I. The ego is an illusion. We're all just shadows of the whole. And this was also taught by the great master Satya Sai Baba. He would say that what the Sanskrit word Jivatma, which means souls, he says, there are not billions of Jivatmas. There's only one. We are only shadows and reflections of the one. And this is what Hakim taught. He taught, yes, we do not just have memory in the brain, we have cellular memory. We may contain memories of many who have lived before, and we were not actually that person. It's just maybe semantics here. But he said, he taught there is only the now. The past and the present are all in the now. So when, as Eddie mentioned last time, when we go to these sites, when you can get in that supreme meditative state, you can connect, I believe, with anyone who's ever lived and will ever live. And not only that, this is why we don't look for halls of records about Edgar Cayce, and everybody's looking for records of under the paw of the Sphinx. We're talking about before there were written records, before there was writing, the stones themselves speak to us.
Yes, yes.
If you have the ears, senses open to listen, they tell you the history.
Oh, yeah.
So I just use science and all of this other stuff to reinforce what Hakim taught me, because so much of what he said just in mere passing has now come to pass as scientific fact that we can prove. All of these things, this knowledge of this technology, of this knowledge of science, which we're only coming to today. We are in the low end of the cycle. We're taught cycles. We don't believe in Big Bang. There was no beginning, there was no end. And even Stephen Hawking has come to that today. I just had a great discussion with somebody. Stephen Hawking did his work on time, A Brief History of Time. That was his doctoral thesis. That was his life's work. And he believed in the Big Bang. He was looking for black holes. He was a big supporter of Einstein. Well, have you heard him lately?
Nope.
He's not anymore.
Good.
He doesn't
Really?
believe in time anymore. He doesn't believe in beginning anymore. He believes in steady state universe, which was what was believed before the 20th century.
Yeah.
There is no beginning, there's no end. Just interminable cycles. We go through cycles. We call them, in the Cometian terms, the 5 stages of the sun. We use the daily movement of the sun to represent 5 stages in our development, our consciousness, and our historical development. And we are in the low end of the cycle now for 5,000 plus years because of this low end of the cycle. We have dichotomies. We have male, female, black, white. We have Jew, Christian, all of this. And it's characterized by the rise of patriarchy, the patriarchal religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, institutionalized warfare, and the environmental degradation we have today.
Yes.
So what it is today, all the movements that have happened, and it goes from Jesus, from Moses, from Muhammad, they were revolutionaries. They were movements trying to bring people out of the doldrums, being hypnotized by those we call the Hanut, the priests who control people, control your emotions, the media, everything. So the idea Hakim would teach, and what we're teaching today, is awake. Realize you're born with 360 senses. If you only think 5, you cripple yourself. And the idea is to open them, awaken, learn, know for yourself. And I was just talking with Brian today. We were talking about the politics in the US and the politics in Peru and Bolivia. And we were talking about how Americans, of all the people on the planet today, seem to be the most who want to be asleep.
I know.
Not
That
only
is true. That
not
is true.
not to think about things, but not to give a shit.
Not to give a shit. That's
Not
the
to
big
care.
Yes.
Not to care.
Well, I want to just point something out because we have literally 1 minute left, but we want to make sure that when we end this, we're talking about how to promote your tours again, Stephen. But when you spoke about the left and the right brain earlier and coming from both perspectives in a healed, whole, and healthy way, the first image that popped into my mind was the politics in North America and how it's Democrat, Republican, it's this against that. Right. That if you want to see a perfect example of how not to think and how not to live and how not to feel, then look at our political arena here. But when you look at how to come from a whole brain place, then get your ass out in nature and then connect with people like Stephen Mehler.
Power play. Thank you. And that's the truth. Or any teacher who takes you to where indigenous people call a power place and to learn. I mean, I'll just leave it with this one political statement. As I speak to my people, I have so many people around the world. I said, the fact that Donald Trump is even considered a legitimate candidate says all you need to know about America today.
It really does. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. No, it's true. And once again, this amazing man never disappoints.
Ever.
And again, you're going to have to come back again.
Please.
And
I'm
anytime.
going to be in Egypt 2 times in the next couple of months, so there'll be a lot to talk about in May and June.
We're going to go to Egypt with you.
I know
I'm
it.
going.
I know it. I know we will go, and
And we'll
we're gonna have a
promote
blast.
the heaven out of that.
Kemetology.com, as you do. Yes.
Thank you.
And
Always up
for,
there.
for everybody that's tuned in halfway through, or you're just joining us, please check out this video. You can check out our YouTube channel. Just go to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. The last time we had Stephen on, it had thousands and thousands of people watch this, and
Yes.
nothing but compliments about it. So we're glad to have him back. But if you're only listening to the podcast, go to iTunes, go to Stitcher, and go to now on iHeartRadio. We so appreciate you guys for making this a great show for everybody to learn. This is I learn every single show.
Yeah.
Every single show, and this is what it's all about. And please go to truthbetoldwebtv.com. Next Friday, we're doing a psychic readings.
Yes.
So psychics like Eddie and Natalie Tomlinson and who else?
And Ellen Dostal.
So you guys want a psychic reading, please mark your calendars. And I'm just going to sit back and relax and enjoy the show. But Stephen, thank you so much. And please
You're
come
welcome,
back.
my brothers.
And go to his page, and you can go to hiddenincas.tours.com. I know they're going to have some early bird specials. I don't know when's the last time is that going to. Oh, they may.
That tour is still open for about 9 more people for July.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Okay.
And the ones in April 16th through the 28th.
That's still open too. It's 16th to 28th. We've got
Good.
plenty of room available.
Okay.
All right. Well, we got to get out of here because Shar Margolis is next. Thank you, sir. We love you much, and we're going to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you later. And you guys stick around for Shar Vision. She's coming up next.